You're a Desert Storm veteran. 6 months ago, you deployed to Saudi Arabia not knowing if you'd come home. You sat in the desert preparing for a war that intelligence said would cost thousands of American lives. You fought in the 100-hour ground war. You saw friends die. And now it's June 8, 1991. You're marching down Constitution Avenue in Washington, D.C. in full uniform. 200,000 people are cheering. Confetti is falling like snow. Strangers are crying, reaching out to shake your hand, holding signs that say, "Welcome home, heroes." You look around at your unit, the guys you fought with, and you realize, this is what Vietnam veterans never got. This is America saying thank you, and it matters more than you ever thought it would. Welcome back to Gulf War Chronicles. Today we're talking about the National Victory Celebration, the massive parade in Washington, D.C. that welcomed Desert Storm troops home. This wasn't just a parade. It was America's attempt to heal the wounds of Vietnam, to show that this time, we wouldn't let our troops come home to protests and indifference. 200,000 spectators lined the parade route. 8,000 troops marched. Tanks and Bradleys rolled down Pennsylvania Avenue. General Schwarzkopf led the procession. And for one day, America celebrated a clear military victory and the troops who'd achieved it. This is the story of the parade that closed the chapter on Vietnam and defined how America would treat its veterans going forward. The decision to hold a victory parade wasn't automatic. Some advisors warned it could seem premature. Saddam was still in power. Iraq was still a problem. Others worried about the optics during a recession, spending millions on a parade while people were unemployed. But President George H.W. Bush, himself a World War II veteran, understood what this meant symbolically. Vietnam veterans had come home to a divided country. Some were spit on, called baby killers, treated like villains instead of heroes. Bush was determined that wouldn't happen again. The parade was about honoring Desert Storm veterans, but it was also about acknowledging what America had failed to do for Vietnam veterans. The planning took months. The Defense Department coordinated with D.C. officials to organize the logistics of moving 8,000 troops and heavy military equipment through downtown Washington. They'd march from the Capitol down Constitution Avenue, past the White House, ending at the National Mall. The route was 2 miles long. Security was massive. This was 2 months after the war ended. Concerns about terrorism were real, but organizers were determined to make it happen. This would be the largest military parade in Washington since World War II. June 8th was chosen carefully. Weather was good, troops had time to redeploy from the Gulf and prepare. The date also allowed maximum participation. Units that had returned early could attend, and units still overseas had time to send representatives. Not every Desert Storm veteran could march. 540,000 had deployed. Only 8,000 could participate. But those 8,000 represented everyone who'd served. The morning of June 8th was perfect. Clear skies, warm but not too hot. Troops began assembling at dawn. They'd been rehearsing for days, march formation, spacing, coordination. This wasn't a casual walk. This was a military parade, precision and discipline on display. Units wore their desert camouflage uniforms, the chocolate chip pattern that had become iconic, ribbons and medals on their chests. Boots polished despite the desert dust that had covered them months earlier. General Norman Schwarzkopf rode in the lead vehicle, a Humvee, not some fancy car. Schwarzkopf had become a national hero, the face of Desert Storm's success. His presence at the front of the parade was symbolic. The commander leading his troops, just as he'd done in Saudi Arabia. Schwarzkopf later said riding through that crowd, seeing the American flags and the signs and the faces, was one of the most emotional moments of his life. Behind Schwarzkopf came the troops, Army, Marines, Navy, Air Force, unit after unit marching in formation. The crowds went crazy. People were crying, cheering, waving flags. Parents held up signs with photos of their sons and daughters who'd served. Some signs said thank you, others said welcome home. One woman held a sign that read, "This time we remember." That captured it perfectly. This time, unlike Vietnam, America was remembering to honor its troops. The military hardware made an impression. M1 Abrams tanks rolling down Constitution Avenue, the same tanks that had dominated Iraqi armor, Bradley fighting vehicles, Humvees, Patriot missile launchers. This was American military power on parade, the equipment that had won a decisive victory. For civilians who'd watched the war on CNN but hadn't seen the equipment up close, this was tangible proof of what those troops had used to win. Aircraft flew overhead in formation. F-15s, F-16s, A-10s, helicopters. The roar of jet engines mixed with the roar of the crowd. It was loud, overwhelming, emotional. Veterans marching looked up at the aircraft they'd supported or been supported by and felt pride. This was their air force, their technology, their victory. The spectators weren't just random crowds. Many were military families, parents, spouses, children of Desert Storm veterans. They'd spent months worried, watching CNN, waiting for mail, praying their loved ones would come home safe. Now here they were, watching their soldier march past. Some families held signs with their veteran's name, hoping to catch their eye in the formation. When connections were made, a soldier spotting his family, making eye contact, maybe a wave despite parade discipline, those were powerful moments. Vietnam veterans were heavily represented in the crowd. Many came specifically to show support, to ensure Desert Storm veterans got the welcome they themselves had been denied. Some wore their old uniforms, now decades old and tight. Others wore Vietnam veteran caps. They cheered louder than anyone. They understood what this parade meant in a way others couldn't. For them, this parade was vindication, proof that America had learned, that the country could honor its warriors even if not everyone agreed with the war. The National Mall was the endpoint. 8,000 troops marched to a staging area where speeches would be given. President Bush addressed the crowd. He praised the troops, thanked them for their service, and explicitly connected this to Vietnam. He said something like, "You came home to the thanks of a grateful nation, as it should be." That acknowledgement, that it hadn't always been that way, that this time was different, resonated deeply. Schwarzkopf spoke too. He was emotional, his voice breaking at times. He talked about the troops he'd commanded, the soldiers who hadn't made it home, the families who'd sacrificed. He said the parade honored not just those who marched, but everyone who'd served, the 500,000 deployed, the support personnel who'd made it possible, the families who'd held things together at home. It was a generous speech that gave credit widely. The celebration continued beyond the parade. There were concerts, events across the city, parties. But the parade itself, those 2 miles down Constitution Avenue with 200,000 people cheering, that was the moment. That was when Desert Storm veterans felt America's gratitude in a visceral, undeniable way. The contrast with Vietnam was constantly mentioned. Every news report, every speech, every conversation compared this to Vietnam. The parade became as much about healing Vietnam wounds as celebrating Desert Storm victory. That was intentional. Bush and his advisors knew this parade had symbolic importance beyond the immediate event. It was America saying, "We've learned. We won't make that mistake again. We'll separate the war from the warrior. We'll honor the troops even if we debate the policy." Not everyone agreed with having a victory parade. Some thought it was premature, that declaring victory while Saddam remained in power was premature. Critics pointed out that 147 Americans had died. Was that worth a parade? Others thought military celebrations glorified war. These voices were minority positions, but they existed. The overwhelming public sentiment supported the parade. America wanted to celebrate, wanted to honor its troops, wanted a clear win after decades of ambiguous conflicts. For the troops who marched, the experience was surreal. Months earlier, they'd been in combat or preparing for combat, living in tents, eating MREs, wondering if they'd survive. Now they were marching past the Capitol building with crowds cheering. The cognitive dissonance was real. Some veterans said it felt dreamlike, like it was happening to someone else. The transition from war zone to victory parade was too fast, too dramatic, but they appreciated it nonetheless. The parade cost about $12 million. Some taxpayers grumbled about the expense during a recession, but most Americans seemed to feel it was money well spent. 12 million to honor 500,000 troops who'd risked their lives seemed reasonable. The economic impact on DC from tourism and spending probably offset much of the cost anyway. Cities across America held their own welcome home events, smaller parades, ceremonies, celebrations. The Washington Parade was the biggest and most visible, but it represented what was happening nationwide. America was welcoming its troops home properly this time. Towns would have events when local units returned. High schools would honor alumnus who'd served. It was a national phenomenon, not just a DC thing. For Vietnam veterans watching, the parade was bittersweet. Happy for Desert Storm vets getting the recognition they deserved, but painful remembering they'd never gotten that welcome. Some Vietnam veterans found it healing, seeing the country finally get it right, even if too late for them. Others found it bitter. Why now and not then? Both reactions were valid. The parade couldn't undo Vietnam's failures, but it showed America was trying to do better. The parade is remembered as a high point of early 90s American confidence. We'd won a war decisively. The military performed brilliantly. Casualties were low. The mission was accomplished. America felt powerful and competent. That confidence wouldn't last. The 90s brought new challenges, and by 2001 everything changed. But in June '91, for one day, America celebrated military success and honored its warriors. That moment mattered. If you marched in the Desert Storm Victory Parade, or if you attended as a spectator, or if you watched on television, leave a comment below. The parade was a cultural moment as much as a military one. It defined how America would treat returning troops going forward. Thanks for watching Gulf War Chronicles. The National Victory Celebration wasn't just confetti and tanks rolling down Pennsylvania Avenue. It was America's attempt to heal Vietnam wounds, to honor a new generation of veterans, and to show that we'd learned how to welcome warriors home. 200,000 people cheering 8,000 troops, that's powerful. That matters. That's what made the difference between Vietnam's painful homecomings and Desert Storm's triumphant ones. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button. We've told the combat stories, the technology stories, the human stories. The Victory Parade story is about what happened after, how America processed the victory and honored the people who'd achieved it. I'll see you in the next one.